All right, our next question tonight is, and this has been, I thought I saw it only in one person asking about this, but then I found like 4 different people as I went deeper in the last month and a half. Because of cancellations, people are wondering about retainers. Should they give the retainer back? And this is
if the dentist wants it back, then you should give the retainer back to the dentist.
That's true. That's true. I just figure you leave it on your lunchroom, the tray in the lunchroom, and it gets thrown away like every other, 6th grader who's
let the dog eat it.
Yeah, or there is that.
The biggest input I have to this. Go ahead.
So Dan, refunding a retainer. Is there a time in which you would do that? Let's just start there.
Yeah, there is, and I've done it a couple different times. So let's take COVID out of the situation because that can get into the legal argument, and I think let's look at the one that's
most common now. Hopefully,
exactly. So there's been a situation where a father of the bride passed away, and we're talking it was probably 6 months before the wedding, and it was one of those things that she was so distraught that she was like, listen, we're going to push it back, but I don't know when we're pushing it back. And I was like, well, we can, and you could just tell like she was just really stressed and everything else. And I said, you know what? I said, this is fine. I said, let's make this as stress-free as possible. And I gave the retainer back and I walked away and things were fine. And later on, they came back to me. But it was one of those things, like in the moment, you could tell it was just like she was so kind of distraught about this because now dad, who was coming along and helping take care of the finances and stuff, is not there. So part of, I think, what led to them even asking for it back was they didn't know how they were going to pay for this. This was, was a very unexpected thing of dad passing. So that was one, and I had another one where the couple, something just weird. It was just a weird vibe that I got in the way that they kind of went apart, and it was just one of those things. And I was just like, you know what, I'm almost glad just to be done with this,
sure,
and just and return it from that standpoint.
I think, Dan, the very first example you gave is the way I plan to, after COVID, is to handle rebookings. Is that I did this with a wedding from a couple of years ago. This was pre-COVID, actually. That they're like, okay, we're going to postpone, but we're going to still do it, but we're going to do it down the road. And it's like, I don't want this hanging over my head. I don't want this on my books that I have to deal with it. And truthfully, I don't want to be locked into my 2018 contract when it could be 2022 or 2023 and not knowing where I'm going to be at and such. So in that case, I did the same thing as the retainer back, and it was 5-6 months ahead. So it was not a big deal as far as if I wanted to rebook it, the opportunity, the time was there. Prior to that, the only other times I would give a retainer back is a death. Obviously, if one of the two died, or something to that effect would obviously be a big thing, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I've had that where it's canceled, the 3 months out, and they're like, yeah, we're going to cancel because the groom was doing whatever, or whatever, the bride was doing whatever. Yeah, that's not going to get much sympathy from me, and unless they've made more payments, and if they have made more payments beyond the retainer, then I would refund that money because the retainer was there to hold a date and to start the initial booking work, which we've gone through. But if it's for a death or something to that effect, then it's a completely different story. And even if they would, and I have had that where the groom died like within a week of the wedding, everything went back because I didn't want to be that person.
That's the other thing is you got to think of it from your business standpoint, and for lack of better terms, the PR that you're going to get of the positive nature, even positive karma that's going to go with that. Just the ability of setting yourself up. This was a guy who didn't need to do this, and suddenly out of nowhere he's doing that and stepping up. Tony in the chat, he also says, if I rebook that date, I will refund it. That's another philosophy that I have. If it's 6 months, 8 months out, and I'm able to book something that's comparable, yeah, I'm gonna return that fee. I don't tell them. It's just out of nowhere I send them the money.
And that actually is because if you take a retainer and if they find out that you rebooked their date and kept the retainer, and they take you to small claims court, you will lose, because that is one of the things that the judge will say, well, the retainer was basically to make sure you had work for the day, and you had work for the day. So if you think you can double dip at the expense of these poor people, you're going to lose. So, yeah, I would, Tony, I would handle it like the way Dan does, basically that it becomes a hidden return for them or whatever. But I definitely wouldn't talk about that, because then you could get into the ugliness where they're like, oh, you didn't work very hard to book that. And we know that 3 people called you on that day to book you, and you said no because you were already booked. Well, then what's up with that? And you're just, ugliness could pursue. Sticking with it's a non-refundable retainer is great, and that will get you out most of the time, pretty much scot-free, even if they take you to court. But if you do rebook the date, you're best to just cut them that retainer back. Even if you would do a handling fee or a wedding, a small, keeping a small part of it as a labor fee for putting things together, that would be acceptable, because the judge is going to look at that and say, yeah, you did have 3 hours of time and effort put into their wedding, so you should get some compensation for your time. But you've rebooked the date, so you should refund the bulk of the money. So, all right, let's go to our next question here, guys.